Hello, my name's Louise Ulrich. Welcome to this session. It's the first of 5 modules that will teach you all about the Services Provider License Agreement, or SPLA. In this introductory session, we're going to go through a number of scenarios to get an overview of some of the different options that customers have for deploying and licensing software with the help of a partner. And ultimately, we'll see where the SPLA agreement fits in with the volume licensing agreements. Here's our agenda for this session, and you can see that we're going to start with a reminder of the volume licensing agreements, since this is, of course, how many organisations have historically bought their software licenses, and we'll look at some of the scenarios that are enabled with volume licensing programs. Then we'll introduce some hybrid solutions, so that's where volume licensing agreements and SPLA work together to deliver a solution to a customer. And finally, we'll turn to solutions using only SPLA and get an overview of these types of solutions. I should say at this point that this is an introductory module, and modules 4 and 5 in this series really give you some depth in the different solutions that are possible. But let's get started with the first item on our agenda. This diagram shows the existing volume licensing programs and whether they're aimed at small, the blue ones, or large, the purple ones, customers. Whether they require commitment from the customer in terms of, for example, covering all qualified devices, or whether a customer can purchase as much or as little as they need through a transactional arrangement. It also shows which agreements offer non-perpetual licenses, shown by the dots, and whether software assurance is a mandatory purchase, where the SA is shown in a circle, or optional, where the SA isn't in a circle. All of the products purchased through these agreements have traditionally been installed on hardware on the customer's premises, owned and managed by them. Now, something that's happened relatively recently is that customers can now buy online services through the majority of these agreements as well. And you can see these subscription licenses added to all of the programs apart from Select Plus. These customers could buy online services through another agreement, the Microsoft Online Subscription Agreement, or MOSA. Now, this does mean that customers start to have more choice as to their software deployment. With a product like Exchange, for example, they could buy Exchange server licenses and install the software on their own servers, or through the same agreement, purchase Exchange Online user subscription licenses and use the Microsoft hosted solution. And what we want to do in this session is to look at yet another option available for customers when a partner is involved who can offer further alternatives. Let's start to take a look. The first example we're going to look at is the one linked to what we've been talking about, where the customer wants to own and manage all the hardware and software licenses. They're doing everything themselves. And I've assumed here that this is likely to be a solution that's based on the customer premises. So we have a physical server, which is owned by the customer, and you can see that I've marked this by putting an asset tag on the server. This server is running Windows Server in the physical operating system environment, and there are 2 virtual machines running, which are obviously going to be used for the benefit of the customer. And again, you can see the asset tags representing that. And these virtual servers are also going to be running Windows Server. Now, these virtual machines are also going to be running applications. So how's all this licensed? Well, in this first example, it's all through volume licensing. And we're going to show those licenses as yellow licenses. And the customer would license the physical server with Windows Server licenses, which would give him rights to run Windows Server in the virtual machines too. And he would also license the applications through his volume licensing agreement. So here we can see that the solution is one that most customers have used for many years and get great benefit from. They completely own and manage the hardware and then use their volume licensing agreement to license both the infrastructure and the applications. However, what we're interested in this session is seeing how a partner can extend the options available to a customer. So let's move on to that now. In this next example, we're looking at a customer who is interested in outsourcing the ownership and management of the hardware, but wants to continue to own and manage software licenses in the traditional way. Perhaps they want to remove the headache of owning licenses like hardware and want a solution with fixed costs and a maintenance contract, etc. However, they have existing software licensing assets and knowledge of Microsoft licensing, and they want to continue to use a volume licensing agreement to make their licensing purchases. Let's take a look at how this could work for our customer. And again, I'm assuming here that this is perhaps a solution that is delivered on a customer's site. Here's the server again, and this time it's owned by the partner. And I'll show this by this asset tag here. But of course, all the virtual machines are going to be used by the customer. So how's this licensed? Well, actually, in exactly the same way as before, with volume licensing licenses used to license both Windows Server and the applications. The rules here are very simple. As long as the hardware is dedicated to the customer, it doesn't need to be owned by them for them to still be able to use licenses acquired through a volume licensing agreement. So the solution we looked at here showed us that we can have hardware owned by a partner, dedicated to the sole use of a single customer, with all the licenses owned by the customer and acquired through their volume licensing agreement. Now in this example, let's have a look at how the partner can play an even more important part in the customer's solution. You can see that the customer is interested in outsourcing not only the hardware, but the licensing of the infrastructure products as well. And they'd like the partner to provide a fully licensed server or servers and to manage them day to day. The customer will then deploy and manage the applications for which they will acquire the licenses. And again, I've assumed that this is a solution that the customer has on their premises. So here's the server again, and again in this example it's owned by the partner with all the virtual machines used by the customer. And this time, as you know, the partner is going to license the infrastructure, and they don't do that via a volume licensing agreement, but via a different agreement. And of course that's the SPLA, which you may remember stands for the Services Provider License Agreement. I'm going to show licenses acquired through this program as blue licenses, and the partner would use a SPLA agreement to license the infrastructure components. And the applications? Well, again, the customer can still use their volume licensing agreement to license these. So the solution in this example was that the partner owned the hardware and provided it to the customer for their dedicated use. They then acquired licenses for the infrastructure through a SPLA agreement. Now, we won't go into the detail in this session about the rules of this program, that's our next module, but it does tell us what this type of partner is called, of course, a service provider. And they're able to purchase licenses through a SPLA agreement to provide software services for their customers. And in this situation, the customer is still able to use their volume licensing licenses to license the applications running on this partner-supplied hardware and infrastructure. In this example, we're going to start looking at a partner providing a solution off the customer's site, probably in their own data centers. So you can see this is quite similar to the previous example. The customer wants to outsource the ownership of the hardware and the licensing of the infrastructure, but this time the server will be off-site, and they still want to own and manage the software licenses for the applications. There is, however, a key difference coming up which does affect the licensing. Let's take a look. Here's the server again, and again it's owned by the partner. However, what's different here is that the partner is going to use this hardware to provide software solutions to several or indeed many customers, and thus the virtual machines will be used by different customers. We heard about the SPLA agreement on the previous slide, and the partner, the service provider, may again license the infrastructure here with SPLA licenses. And what about the licensing of the applications in the virtual machines? We know that the customer wants to own and manage the software licenses, so are they allowed to use their existing volume licensing licenses in this scenario? Well, the answer is yes, with one condition. They must have software assurance on those licenses. And you can see here that a second customer could bring his volume licensing licenses to this second virtual machine. Note, I've just used green licenses to show the second customer here. It's not yet another volume licensing program. So the solution that we looked at here was where a service provider partner provides software services to his customers. He owns and manages the hardware and licenses the infrastructure through SPLA. His customers can bring their existing volume licensing licenses to this shared hardware environment as long as they have software assurance on those licenses. In our final example of this session, we're going to look at a complete solution offered by a service provider partner, where they're going to own the hardware and provide a completely licensed solution to their customers. Here's the server again, and we know it's owned by the partner. And again, a solution is going to be offered that allows the hardware to be shared by customers, so the virtual machines will be used by different customers. The service provider partner again licenses the infrastructure with SPLA licenses, and this time they also license the applications via SPLA for the use of their customers. So the licensing solution in this scenario enables a service provider to provide a complete solution to his customers, licensed entirely through the SPLA agreement. And the customer does not need to have a separate volume licensing agreement, and to manage the licensing assets, the partner is able to take care of all of that for them. I want to use this slide to give a summary of what we've covered in this module. We've seen that there are 3 types of solutions delivered: volume licensing only, a hybrid of volume licensing and SPLA, and SPLA only. Within the volume licensing only, we saw that this includes the traditional do-it-yourself scenario, where the customer owns everything, but this could be extended with a partner providing hardware. And we saw that this needed to be under the management of the partner and completely dedicated to the customer, in which case they can use their volume licensing licenses. Then we looked at some hybrid examples, with the first one again being a partner managed piece of hardware with the infrastructure licensed through SPLA, with the customer still using their volume licensing licenses for the applications. Alternatively, of course, if a partner wanted to provide a shared hardware solution, then this is possible. And you can see here that a physical server is shared by customers, with a partner licensing the infrastructure via SPLA, and the customers still being able to use their volume licensing licenses as long as they have active software assurance. And finally, there was a SPLA-only solution, where the partner licenses everything through their SPLA agreement to deliver software services to their customers. Now, I said before, we're going to go into depth in Module 4, looking at the wealth of options available. And in fact, what you'll also see then are that there are some scenarios that must be licensed via SPLA, and we'll cover that in detail then. Well, that concludes our introductory session on some of the software solutions that are opened up to customers and partners via SPLA. And remember that customers can take advantage of some or all of these solutions dependent on their exact requirements. Your task now should be to take the associated exam on the Get Licensing Ready site. Remember to download the handout for reference. As I said right at the beginning of this session, this is the first module on the SPLA track, and you may want to work through the other modules in the series. The next module will take you through the details of the agreement itself, and the third module gives you a lot of detail of the licensing of the individual products under SPLA. Then there's a module which gives you a good look at more complex scenarios that are enabled with SPLA. And finally, there's a great module which shows you all the different ways that customers have of getting to the cloud. I hope you enjoyed this session, and good luck in the exam.